From a professional soccer career to becoming a driving force in the mortgage industry, Brian Covey has shown what it takes to find your competitive edge. Get off the sidelines and get in the game. Find your competitive edge with Brian Covey.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Finding Your Competitive Edge. So today, you want to buckle up because if you're listening to a podcast, there's a good chance that you want to know more about how to create your own, or you have a podcast and you want to grow that. So our guest today, Sebastian Rusk, not only is he a member of Apex, he's also one of the guys I would say is one of the founding fathers of podcasts. He talks about it and would tell you podcasts suck unless you actually have one. So guys, I know in my own life, podcasts have been the gateway to introduce me to phenomenal new connections. They've helped me grow my personal brand. And also, guess what? It's a personal development course on steroids because everyone you get to talk to, you learn something from. So today, we're going to talk about podcasting. We're going to talk about, actually, Sebastian's gone into comedy and how do you grow your personal brand? And in the world you live in today, I believe you know there's a step you need to take. And it could be starting your podcast or amplifying your podcast up. So make sure you buckle up, take some notes. Before we get going, we got the book right here. Make sure you go over to Amazon, grab your copy of Conversations with Covey, like, subscribe, go over to YouTube, and make sure you drop us a comment today to let us know how we're doing. Any guests we should bring on. Okay, without further ado, let's jump in. Let's get my guest on. Sebastian, welcome, my friend.
Brian Covey, what's up, brother? Great to see you, man.
Dude, we're in Nashville together.
Yes, we are. In Nashville, recording a podcast episode in your podcast studio. It feels very Nashville-ish.
Isn't it? So I love what you did. So you had a post, you're getting ready to come here. And tell everybody the story. You reached out to me and you're like, hey man, I'm in your city. Yeah. Can we do something?
Yeah.
So let's just unpack that, because how many people go to a city, don't really have a plan. Maybe they have some downtime, but they don't even think about the fact that, hey, who should I be connecting up with? What could I connect and collaborate with them on? And so let's jump into that real quick of like how that started, and then we'll go through some cool stuff.
You posted a picture with the wife a couple nights ago at the soccer game.
Oh yeah.
And I knew you were in Nashville anyway. And I've made that a normal activity. Whatever city that I'm in, two things are usually going to happen. I'm going to find a comedy mic, and I'm also going to go to Facebook and LinkedIn and use a very cool tool called Friends in Nashville. And like magic, Facebook just gives you all your friends in Nashville. I didn't do that for you because I knew you were already here. But we, of course, connected on LinkedIn originally, and then met in person in Apex.
That's right.
So a long time coming to really get some FaceTime together and have a conversation. And so I said, man, let's grab a coffee and a podcast. And you said, hey, how's 9 a.m.? I looked at my calendar. My talk's at 2 today. I go, this is perfect. Love when a plan comes together. So yeah, you got to leverage your network when you're in another city. I try to do the same thing. I live in Miami, so a lot of people make it through Miami. I'm always good for an airport ride and a Cuban breakfast, or coffee or something like that. I've always tried to. I learned that early on in my career, was that you wanted to get around big names, people that you look up to, get around their camp, find out who helps them run their life, and when they're in your city, offer to pick them up at the airport.
Dude, I love it.
Or take them back. So
if you're taking notes today and you're listening to anything, what I would tell you, I've learned this same thing, is when you're going to a city, have a game plan. If you have your top 25 list, we talk about that quite often, of who are the people you'd love to have more time with, whatever it might be, and how do you actually get in front of them, 10, 15 minutes, maybe it's even a podcast. You've got to do that. That is how you grow your network. Too many people, we call them secret agents.
Yeah.
So you're not a secret agent. So I want to back up a little bit because your story is very unique. I think about, you started podcasting before I even probably was listening to one. I think Lewis Howes was the first guy I got into listening maybe 8-9 years ago. I didn't even know what those were, didn't have one of my own, no idea. What got you into podcasting? Let's tell them a little bit about that genesis of your story of how you even got into it.
Yeah, so the story started, 13 years ago, so 2010. 2008, I moved back from Southern California. Market crashed. Had call centers and marketing services to service mortgage companies.
Yep.
Market crashed, nobody to sell leads to, and found myself with a duffel bag and my daughter coming back to Miami. Sold everything, lost everything, all the above. Spent a couple of years, 2008, 2010 were kind of rough. And I was still trying to figure out, I was defeated because I felt like I came from nothing, didn't go to college, had a kid at 20, raised her on my own, made a living for myself, and then I lost it all. So what do I do now? It's a tough defeat, tumbling down the mountain. So I took a gig with a network marketing company on the corporate side in Vegas for a 90-day deal. And my job was to create a training curriculum to help them sell the product. And I would facilitate that training through their live events every 90 days. Typical MLM structure. So I took that gig, and I'll never forget the two leaders that at the time were with this company. Company's no longer, but shocker, I know.
Yeah,
Network
right.
marketing company's not around anymore. But these two guys are. And I saw them take a stage in South Florida before I took this gig. And they came out, and I said, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. This is 2009. This is before everybody wanted to be a speaker and author and coach. And so I went out to Vegas, took this gig, created a training program, and facilitated for the first time. And I came out, and it was about local SEO marketing and ads, etc. It was called Ad Labs, and I wore a lab coat, and I came out and a clipboard, and I facilitated this training. But when I went out and I took that stage, I said, "This is it. This is my God-given gift, is to communicate. The platform is my gift." And I literally have not stopped since. That was 2009. Finished that, came back, was still like, great. Now what are we going to do? Network marketing gig didn't work out. Shocker. But I know I want to be a speaker. So 2010, I woke up, had a big awakening moment. I thought, you know what? I got to figure this out. I got to go see Tony Robbins. So I called my friend that worked for Tony at the time, and she fills me in on all the details. And she said the event's in July in Long Beach. It's $650, the whole nine. I'm like, cool, I got like $8. I'll have to figure that out. Well, she calls me back an hour later, and she says, oh my God, I totally forgot that my best friend lives on Miami Beach, and she's part of Tony's core team of 6. She travels the world with him. So you talk about imposter syndrome. So I was like, all right, great. Love the introduction. She goes, definitely worth a drink. Link up with her. I said, all right, cool. So we did that, and I had shot a video on my laptop trying to resuscitate my marketing business, and I showed her this video as soon as I met her. I go, we just met. You're a perfect stranger. Can you tell me what you think about this video? And it was like low quality laptop video.
Sure.
And she said, she blew up. She was like, holy cow. Like, you got it. Like, not everybody got it. You don't learn having it, but you got it. And I'm like, got what? I wasn't seeing it.
Yeah.
And she said, let's talk more about it on Friday. So we met up on Friday, and she asked me a question as soon as we sat down. And this is where everything changed. She said, so what's next for you? And I said, I don't know. And she said, that's a problem. That's the PG version. So imagine I just met her 10 minutes ago, and she's spitting expletives at me.
Yeah.
But I said, she travels with Tony. She's part of his core team. She probably makes more, well, anybody makes more money than you right now. Maybe you should stay inquisitive. I said, so what do you mean? And she goes, I'll tell you exactly what I mean. Let me ask you a question. Who's missing out because you're not showing up? And I thought, oh my gosh, I never even thought about it like that. Quick side note, the keynote that I'm giving today at 2:00, the title of the talk is Who's Missing Out Because You're Not Showing Up.
Yeah.
Full circle, ladies and gentlemen. So she said, listen, you've been doing a lot with social media. I was real active. I've been around since the beginning. LinkedIn, MySpace, Facebook. I watched it all unfold. And she said, why don't you do something with it? You start a YouTube channel. You'd have a bunch of subscribers. I think you could do something with that. There's a lot of buzz around social media. And I was like, what could I call it? She goes, I don't know. Let's brainstorm a little bit. I said, what about Social Buzz TV? She goes, I dig it. So I went to a designer that Monday and created a logo, which would become the company's logo, which was Social Buzz TV. So I didn't know how I was going to monetize this.
Sure.
I just knew that I knew more than most about social media. I knew that my desire to get back to the top of the mountain was undeniable, and that was enough to get me back in the game. And then I remembered that if you make enough noise, somebody is going to come knock on your door.
That's right.
That includes the police after 10 p.m. So I had a logo, and and then one day I put on a bow tie. And then I thought, wait a second. So I'm going to these networking events. And then I start hosting my own networking events. And then people are like, and then I start hosting my own social media boot camps. And then people are like, hey, I met you at an event, met you at your event, went to your boot camp. Maybe you can help me figure out this social media thing for my business. Bingo.
Boom.
So right around that time, I met a guy by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk. And Gary and I instantly hit it off. He was critiquing wine on YouTube at the time. No one knew who Gary was. They couldn't even pronounce his last name. Now he's obviously a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah.
But I really invested in that relationship knowing that this guy's going somewhere. He's doing something. big. So I read his first book, Crush It, and that helped me lay out the blueprint of what I would do. Build my personal brand as a speaker, content creator, and build an agency that also creates content as a publishing media outlet online. This allowed me to get in everywhere. So media, anything media related, I'd show up with a bow tie, a flip cam, and Social Buzz TV business card. He's in. He's new media.
That's right.
So I was able to mingle with all the old media and get into just some remarkable opportunities in addition to going to events. My speaking continued, but at that point, I would speak wherever you'd have me. You know, soapbox in your backyard, churches, Rotary clubs. If there was more than 2 people in the room, I'm your guy. I wanted to scale that. So I joined the National Speakers Association, and I went to their first conference in like 2013. And I was introduced to my publisher. So I was able to write my first book, Social Media Sucks If You Don't Know What You're Doing, which was my story of how I started to create something. So that led to more speaking opportunities. The first one that I had was with EO, Entrepreneur Organization.
Oh, wow.
For their conference.
Yeah.
My publisher put it together because they're part of that group, and Gary was the keynote. So it sucks to go after Gary, but I did it anyway, but like full circle. So every time I'd run into Gary, I haven't seen him in a few years now just because he's, again, worldwide phenomenon, we'd be in another city. And he'd be headed to Miami. It'd be the wildest thing. Like we'd see each other in Philly. He's like, I'm headed to Miami for the Heat game, you know? So joining NSA in that community helped out with that process, but also led to me writing my first book, which led to more speaking opportunities. Yeah. But as you know, the speaking business now more than ever is extremely competitive.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people pay speakers. You have to figure out, and I didn't have all those components together. It wasn't like I could go deliver a keynote, and if that landed for you, well, maybe you'll hire me to help you out with your social media. It just there wasn't enough meat there. So I decided maybe I'll start offering to MC events instead of speaking at them. I got the bow tie, I got the content thing, I got more energy. So I went to a conference in right around that time, 2013, called Social Fresh. And it was in Tampa and in San Diego at the time. My buddy Jason Keith put it together. And social media conference for social media marketers. And the speakers were big brands. JetBlue, Hershey, Southwest. What are we doing behind the scenes with social? So they would come and teach. The content was fantastic. And the group is great too. You're with your peers. No energy though. So he asked for feedback. He invited me. He goes, why don't you come and check out the conference? It's in Tampa. It's not too far from where you're at. So I did that, and he asked for feedback at the end. And I said, conference was great. Content was great. But by noon on the first day, I wanted to punch myself in the face due to the lack of energy in there. And he's an extreme introvert, so he's looking at me like I got 10 heads and boogers.
Yeah.
And he said, so what do you suggest I do? I go, you let me MC it next time. And I had never done this before. But man, when you see it and you just know, I mean, I knew I had the speaking game on lock. I'm like, how hard could the MC stuff be?
Right.
It's real hard, by the way.
Yeah.
So he called me like 3 months later and goes, let's do it, man. And flew me out to San Diego. He goes, I can't pay you. I said, cool, just don't make sure it doesn't cost me any money.
Yeah.
So fly me out there, feed me, put me up, and give me a stipend, $150 or something, which is exactly what he ended up doing. And I did that for, 2 or 3 years, and then they kind of changed the format and everything. But that opportunity of emceeing that allowed me to meet individuals that I had already looked up to in the space. Mari Smith, the queen of Facebook, Mike Stelzner, social media examiner, Jay Baer, just a brilliant, marketing mind. And I was able to build those connections through doing that MC work, which led to other stuff. But it still I wasn't connecting all the dots. It wasn't like I would get off stage and they're like, wow, great job, nice bow tie. Can you help me out with my social media? Mm-hmm. I'm in a social media conference. So I continued to build the agency, continued to MC, and then I did it for free for as long as if you let me in the room, I was in. And then one day I see an ad on Twitter for an event called Traffic and Conversions from Digital Marketer. And I go, this looks cool. I never heard of it before. And I follow Digital Marketer, and then Twitter's like, oh, you should follow this guy named Ryan Dice too. And I'm like, oh, cool, president of Digital Marketer. Perfect. Start at the top, work my way down. And I'm like, hey, man, you need a guy in a bow tie to rock your stage for Traffic and Conversions? He replies like 10 minutes later, actually, we do. Can you shoot me a DM? DMs me his cell phone and says, let's chat tomorrow morning. So he's calling me. He's dropping his kids off at school. And he's like, man, yeah, we definitely need help because we're scaling. I don't want to be in this position anymore. I want to do what I do, lead the company, and speak when I speak, but not be running from stage to stage. So we definitely need you. Hired me on the spot.
Wow.
He was like, how much is it going to cost me? I was like, $2,500 a day plus travel expenses. And he goes, all right, cool. Send over the invoice. We'll send the wire this afternoon. And I was like, I hung up the phone. I was like, I just made $7,500.
That worked.
Wow. Went from $150 free.
Yeah.
So I did that show for, probably 4 years. A lot of great relationships. Still didn't have my thing, though. I was hanging out with Ryan Dice and Perry Belcher and Roland Frazier and just brilliant minds, but my character was out of alignment. Like, it was very much ego driven. And I learned a lot of valuable lessons as part of that process. Yeah. This is not about you. You're a hired gun. You're here to do a job, get your check, and go home. Are we clear? Had a couple of those conversations, and you'll learn after a while. And I always had this empty space coming back from these marketing events because I didn't have my thing. And I remember talking to Ryan one day in the green room while we were waiting for one of the speakers to finish, and we started talking about, how do you find your thing, or I think I'd shared that with him. And he said, when you can build a bridge in between a problem and you being the solution, and that bridge is value, then you figured it out. Yeah. And man, I tell you, I racked my brain trying to figure this all out. Cause I'm like, the agency's doing good. US Health was a gigantic client. I spent a lot of time creating content, helping out with social strategy, but they'd come and go. 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Some would stick around, and I just couldn't deal. And plus I started to hate the work. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So 2016 was a big pivotal year in figuring Sebastian out. And I set on a journey that started with wanting to find a girlfriend. And in the beginning of 2019, I found a girlfriend, all right, and we met on March 1st, 2016 for a beer, and she was in this personal development course at the time. And I was like, let me tell you about personal development. I mean, walked on fire 2 times, landmark forum, done it. And she was like, that's cool, but you need to take this course. It's called gratitude training. It has nothing to do with being grateful. And she goes, changed my life. And I said, cool, I'm in integration mode right now. She's like, all right, cool. I think you should take it. Like, it's the first date, right? She ends up signing me up a couple weeks later. And it was clear that, God put that girl in my life to get me through those doors. And I'm so grateful for those doors that opened, because I went through that course. It was 2 parts. It was a total of 8 days. And on the other side of that, I learned how to love myself. I learned how to be fully accountable for my life in every single area. Every single thing that's happened to me ever is my fault and will always be my fault, and there's nobody to blame. It's time to stop blaming mom and dad and this story that I had carried for so long. So I came out of that. She broke up with me in the middle of it. So as if personal development's not hard enough. We got a little bit of heartbreak there, but I came out of that loving myself, forgiving my dad, clearing up making the phone call, just getting it done and handled, and staying committed to becoming the best version of myself that I could do, so that I could then bring my gifts to the world, because it was incongruent before. That's right. I was trying to do all this stuff, but then at the same time I hated myself, and I was a very angry individual, and I was frustrated, and I was envious, all the opposite of the fruits of the spirit. And so I came out of that, and I said, okay, cool. Now we got to figure out the business thing. We figured out Sebastian for the most part. Yeah. We got to figure out the business thing. What do you want to do? Well, I don't want to do the social media stuff. And I know that for sure. So I decided to go rent a co-working space right when I got done with the course. I was like half a year of just checked out. Like, I was there, but I wasn't there. Yeah. And I rented a co-working space desk. And I ran into a friend that same week in that co-working space, and she had an internet radio show. And I'm like, what's that? And she's like, I'm like, you don't even know. You should start a podcast. It's way easier. And I had always had my podcast, changed the name a couple times, but it was always my networking tool. It was always my way to get in front of people, but I wasn't consistent with it. But I knew how to do it. And she said, why don't you create a solution or a course that helps people start a podcast? And that was it. Boom. The freaking antennas went up, light bulbs went on. I went back up to my rented desk, and I mapped out what would become the Podcast Launch Lab, which is a turnkey podcast launch solution to take you from idea to iTunes in 90 days or less with our proven podcast launch solution. And I just started beating that drum everywhere I went. I was still maintaining the clients because I had to eat with Social Buzz, but I was phasing them out, and I was just having an honest conversation. Man, my heart's just not in it anymore. We can do a podcast now moving forward, but I'm not going to do this ongoing social media content and all this. Not interested, heart's not in it anymore. And I literally have not looked back since that day.
So was that the breakthrough, you think, for you? Because as I listen to you tell your story, it's like most people lack clarity. They go try all these things. They dabble here, they dabble there. And in their heart, they know that's not what they should be doing. But they still show up because they got to get a paycheck. So was that the breakthrough when you got clarity and you said, okay, I'm coming back. This podcast thing kind of, it brings together all of the things you love to do? Or was it mainly the solution you found that there was a huge problem out there?
It allowed me to stay in the industry without leaving it.
Interesting.
But be able to leave what I was doing.
Okay.
Because podcasting is still under the social media umbrella.
Sure.
And then I started to dig deeper and continue to peel layers back. And I grew up in a radio station. My dad was a DJ for 29 years. Zero interest in following his footsteps, like zero. But like a buddy told me on the golf course a couple of years ago when I shared that story with him, he said, man, our genes sure are powerful, aren't they? I'm like, I don't know anything about genes, but my grandfather's name was Gene. Maybe that's a start on that. Yeah. But so I've been continuing, and now the non-negotiables continue to be explicitly clear in my life. It's speaking, comedy, podcasting, or I'm not leaving the house.
Yeah.
And I'm on my way up. I haven't air quotes made it, whatever that means for anybody. To me, it's financial security where I've got more money than I'll be able to ever spend that I can leverage and do good with. I'm not there yet, but we're well on our way. I mean, I bootstrapped this podcast business off the ground. I literally sold it off the ground.
Yeah, which is crazy.
It totally is.
Is that your definition of success? I'm always curious what people think. So as you start to look at it, have you defined what that success would look like for you?
Yeah, freedom. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in a place right now. My daughter graduated from college. She just moved to Texas. She's in the master's program. She got a job at Buc-ee's that she is just over the moon about.
Buc-ee's.
$21 an hour with benefits. I mean, where were these jobs when we were kids, Brian?
Yeah, look at that place though.
I haven't been.
Oh, you've never been?
I've never been.
You've never been in one at all?
No. I saw it on the Today Show, but that was about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard it's quite the experience. So
quick sidebar, I'd never been to one until about 3 months ago. Soccer trip, of course. And one of the other dads is riding with us and their daughter, and we end up stopping at a Buc-ee's, and I realized, holy cow, I've never seen this many places that you can fuel up your car, right? Like the gas, I didn't even know that's kind of the ticket to get in. But then you got the brisket sandwiches all. Anyway, quick side note, you need to go just to experience a business that has been taken off the ground and a vision that is moved into now these franchises.
Oh, they're like top rated company to work for.
Yeah, you hear. So I'm not surprised they pay that as they go on. Okay, let's jump back because I think a lot of people are probably where you were. And they're sitting there going, okay, Sebastian, like, so you're trying all these things. Like, how did you know this was it? Like, because I listened, you got the radio voice. You tried some things. You go, and I heard you say, I don't want to do this, which I've started with that in my life in certain seasons going, it's not so much what I want to do. What do I not want to do? Let me eliminate all those things. And then that list got really small of, okay, now I get to decide what's there.
Yeah.
Did you go through that process of saying no to a ton of stuff and then going, because you listed out those three. You're like, I'm going to do comedy, speaking, and podcast.
Yeah.
How did you get to that? Because I think many people today, they go from crypto, they go to speaking, they go to this course, they go to that course. Now it's AI. Now it's, hey man, I'm going to teach you.
A lot of podcast companies jumping in.
A lot of this, right? And you look at that. What advice would you give people to know, one, the direction to go, and then two, how to turn that into some revenue and a business, right? Because this can't just be a passion project for most.
Yeah.
They got to earn income.
I think that you have to start with, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be as a human being?
Yeah.
Figuring that out. I don't know if you've heard the story before of the Michelangelo and the statue of David, but people went in awe of this statue of David. Like, Michelangelo, how did you create such absolute beauty? And he's like, I didn't create anything. I simply chipped away of everything that wasn't David, and David appeared. And I thought, wow, what a great like analogy to life.
That's right.
Like, what are you chipping away with? What are you chipping away at yourself on a daily basis, internally, in your head and your mind, your heart and your spirit, on a daily basis, to continue to refine that process? And then move into, once you've started to get that dialed in, then move into, what do we want to do with business? And it starts with, what are you good at? I didn't set out to, this is just my gift. My gift is to communicate. Like, how did you become a speaker? How did you get good at speaking? I'm like, I'm good at speaking? I'm going where I'm told.
Yeah.
I'm going where I'm led. I believe we have an internal compass. I believe that God creates the desires of our heart. And when we have those desires, and it's our responsibility to go do something with them.
That's right.
And my why as cliche as that is these days, the why is very important still, is I get to see people step into a completely different version of themselves because they decided to start a podcast. So the podcast is just a catalyst.
Yeah.
And to be able to see this, because the number one thing that I deal with on a daily basis is that inner critic, not me personally, but with the clients. Well, that happens with me too, but with the clients we get to work with is, nobody's going to listen. I'm going to sound like crap, look like crap. I don't know if I should be doing this. I'm not sure. You're questioning everything instead of just putting imperfect action into play and saying, I'm going to do this because I said I'm going to do. There's something to be said with setting a declaration for what you're going to do. 30 years ago, Steve Jobs said, hey, I'm inventing this computer you're going to carry around with you all over the place. In fact, you're going to be digitally addicted to it. You're going to be able to make phone calls and send pictures all over the world. These things called text messages. Most people probably thought Steve Jobs was nuts.
They did.
You're going to carry what? He said, I'm creating the iPhone because I said that I'm creating the iPhone.
Yeah.
The end. I don't need anybody's permission. And that, I never forgot about that. I learned that in that course that I took. They included that. Like just being able to declare a declaration of what you want to be and how you want to show up in this world and your ways of being and being able to do that. And I never thought that everything that I would learn to like unravel Sebastian would then be applied in the work that I do on a daily basis, which I had a client tell me not too long ago, Sebastian, what you do has very little to do with podcasting. Yeah, sure, you make our podcast a reality, but you've gotten me so far out of my head and back into reality, out of your head into your heart.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult transition for some people.
For most people, I would say. And what you said, I don't want people to miss this because this is the pillar, I believe, of personal development. I don't care if it's podcasting. I don't care if it's speaking. I don't care the comedy thing. That doesn't matter to me. To me, those are just venues and like avenues you can go down. It is personal development. And who do you have to become so that you can be comfortable to walk on a stage and speak? And yes, you have to put the reps in. And yes, people just don't walk on stage and they're magic and they're amazing. Everybody that's speaking is actually putting in reps today, especially today, because the quality you mentioned earlier, the quality of the people are there. The same is true with podcasting. So who do you have to become? And actually writing that out. And I love you said, this is what my declarations are. This is who I'm becoming. And what I've found in my own journey, then when I become that person, cool, speaking becomes easier. Not easy, but it becomes easier. And I go, now I can step into that person and get over the large hurdle, which is, God, what are people going to say? Sure. How am I going to look? What's it all about? I'm like, okay, I've already done some things that have qualified me to move into that space. Yeah. Now I've got to get really good at this.
Yeah.
If I'm going to go and do podcasting, how do we make sure it gets great? So let's jump into the question I think a lot of people want to know. Why should people have a podcast?
I think that podcasting will change your life and your business if you let it. So from the personal development, communication skills, who you become, that's the human side of things. What's possible there? Most people are terrified of public speaking. Most people.
It's number one fear, right?
Yeah, it is. Number two is dying. So
yeah.
Riddle me that one. So number one, who do you get to become as a human being? Because you started a podcast. And then number two, podcasting is the ultimate networking tool. It gets you in front of people that you want to build relationships with and that you want to do business with. We don't know what's on the other side of this podcast interview. We just know we're doing it because this is where we're supposed to be doing right now, and where it's at. And it's a great connection point, and it just lines up. I mean, this is a great example of how to leverage podcasting to further relationships and also build them too. So when we look at the two main reasons, number one, ultimate networking tool. Who can you interview and get on your podcast that you can sell something to? Number two, what can you do with the podcast after you're done with it? Micro content, reels, stories, blog posts, AI tools, all the above. So one of the talks I give is how starting a podcast can solve all of your social media content problems. And I believe that it can, because you record one podcast episode and then we've got the video aspect, the video recording of a podcast. There are no video podcasts. You hear me? No video podcasts. There is a video recording of a podcast. You're able to chop that content up and repurpose it and be consistent. So what happens when you're consistent with your podcast content? Well, people find you and they look to you as the go-to source for what you do. So I think that leveraging it as a content and networking tool, most people are not going to start a podcast and have it explode and get a bunch of sponsors and become the next Joe Rogan.
Right.
I'm not telling you that that's not possible. I'm just saying most people won't get there. So Who cares how many people listen to the podcast? Who cares how many downloads you have? How many new relationships are you establishing? And what opportunities are you extracting out of those relationships because of the podcast? Oh, and by the way, your social media game sucks, and now it doesn't because you're consistent with content every day because you're chopping up content from the podcast episode. And that was a tragedy I learned early on from Gary was, being able to say, he's always been gung-ho on the podcast because he's like, dude, podcast, chop it up into this, goes into this. You chop it up into 100 pieces of content, which you technically could so I think that strategy is here to stay. I don't think it's going anywhere. I read an article yesterday from the past executive of Spotify, Max Tucker. I guess he sold his platform to Spotify for like $100 million, then became an executive, and now he's leaving again, going to do something. Guy's just doing some great stuff, and it was a great article over on Founder. And a lot of the same stuff a lot of the same sentiments that I talk about and share, which are, you've got to be authentic. You have to know who your audience is. You can't just be like everybody else out there starting a podcast. There's a lot of bad podcasts out there. And that's why there's 3 million podcasts now, and how many are active? I mean, pod fade is real because most people are not starting a podcast for the reasons they should be starting a podcast. And that is to become a better communicator, build relationships, and grow my business. I think those are the 3 main things.
If someone had told me those would be the objectives, when I started, I really do it because I had this vision of, I had some really cool people in my life, some mentors, some people that I had connections with. And I'm like, okay, this has been 2 decades of meeting awesome people, from sports to music to leadership to all these things. I thought, well, I have some great conversations. I'm just going to share those with the world. That was my intention. And then I realized I sucked at the conversation and that part of it. And so I had to get really good at prepping. It is a personal development journey. And I love that you said that because becoming a better communicator starts here. And a lot of people don't start with the right intentions. Yeah. And so I want you guys to listen back to what Sebastian was sharing, because when you take this from a realistic approach, and I thought about this the other day and it was shared on social, the same is true for podcasting, I believe. And I love your thoughts on it. People are like, man, I'm posting and you only got like 10 likes, let's say. 10 people gave me the thumbs up or whatever. Okay. Say 10 people listen to your podcast. And obviously ours does more than that now. But when we started, we probably had 2. One was probably my parents. One was probably the person that was the guest, right? Let's be real.
Yeah.
But imagine if just 10 people listen to your show and you put 1 out a week, 2 out a week, whatever it is. You're building reps. You're building your audience. And I always say, man, you only need one person, right? It's like the Tony Robbins team member that helped you. You needed one person to help you create a breakthrough. Yeah. You had Gary earlier in your life. It was the one person that kind of, hey, here's what you can do with this and go forward. So everybody listening out there, your goal is not, and at least my goal is still not today, man, we need thousands upon thousands of every show downloads. The reality is, who are we going to be able to reach? Who can we make an impact on? And when you get clear on that, I found the other stuff's not there. So how do people get clear if they're starting the podcast? And I love you said, okay, here's what you're going to get out of it. But how do they determine what they should be talking about and to create an audience that might actually, want to tune into it?
Yeah, I think that it's figuring out how to create valuable conversations with your guest. If you're looking to go out alone with a podcast, it's not going to be too sustainable. I talk for a living, and filling air for 10 minutes is a very challenging process. And I'm sure you've shared the same sentiments. I think that getting real clear on like, how can I bring value to the world through this show and also market my business while highlighting my guest. I mean, those are a couple spinning plates there, but that's really like the starter kit for.
That's the game plan.
Yeah. For figuring it all out. If you're just, we want to, I mean, my biggest thing is I make people sell me I don't want to sell you. You're already sold. You're on the phone with me. I need you to sell me on why you want to start a podcast.
Yeah.
Because if it's, I get together with my friends and we drink some wine and we're really funny and we want to record it, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot, by the way.
Yeah.
And, we just start a podcast because, and I think people's lack of understanding of what a podcast actually is. And I think that's what really started to get the gears going in my head a little bit, because everyone would be like, hey, I saw your podcast. And it was like a YouTube video in like 2016, or like, I saw your Snapchat. How's your podcast going? People would just call everything a podcast. And I was like, well, this is different.
Yeah. Well, let's define that. What do you define as a podcast?
So a podcast, by definition, is an audio file that's uploaded to the internet to be consumed auditorily.
There we go.
By definition.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of like video podcasts and all this, listen, you can record a video of the podcast recording, but never was there a mention of a video podcast. And Spotify's tried to market this a little bit with their embedded, because if I send you a video, your brain says, I got to watch this video. I can't go clean the kitchen and just listen to it.
Right.
But if I send you my podcast episode, you crank that up on the sound system and you just get to sweeping the kitchen away and you're listening away. But a video is like, I got to watch this. I got to see it. Never in a million years. And I love Rogan's podcast whenever I have an extra week to listen to one episode. But never once have I been like, oh, I want to see him smoking cigars, with a guest. Very rarely. I'm like, do I even care where it's at? So we consume content differently. So some people want to listen, some people want to watch, some people want to do a hybrid of both. But I don't think that it's, I really want to watch that podcast episode today. Maybe it could. I think if you're a well-known name and you've got a larger name, it's a good idea to have a video component of the podcast as like if you have a growing YouTube channel, etc., as another piece of content. Cool. But if you're just getting started, this whole idea of like, I'm going to put my podcast on YouTube and I know they've started a podcast category, which by the way has absolutely nothing to do with podcast statistics, downloads, and RSS feed. Nothing. It was just simply labeled podcast.
Yeah. Easier to find.
Correct.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah, people lost the track. Well, I love that you say that. So let's give people some tips on what do you think makes a great podcast today? Like once somebody's identified, okay, I'm going to go down this. I got an idea of what my target audience is. I have an idea of what I'm going to talk about, guests and format. What then from there makes a great podcast?
Short and sweet. Short, sweet, and to the point. And this is a PSA for podcast hosts out there. You got one job, and that's to shut up and ask questions. That's it. You do a great job, by the way.
Gracias.
Way too many podcast hosts out there like to make it all about them. And I'm not talking about just sitting there talking about themselves. That happens by default. But I'm talking about you share a story because you're my guest, and then I go, well, let me tell you a version of that, how that happened with me. And there's a lot of big names out there that do this. There's a lot of big name podcasters out there that are terrible at what they do. Like they're terrible podcast hosts. It's awful. But they do it. And they've got a big name so they can get away with it. Most people cannot. And I learned this from the great Larry King. It's an 80-20 rule. And that your guest should be talking 80% of the time. You should be talking 20% of the time. It's your job to ask questions and expand upon all those questions. Really? Why'd that happen? Tell me more about that. Interesting. Never thought. Too many times and I've caught myself before, but awareness is the trick, because once you're aware of it, then you can correct it. I would, it's like when we were kids, if our parents said, hey, if you think you're talking too much, you are. Like that's a great rule of thumb to have with podcasting. But, when you're creating valuable content and you're having someone else is giving you their time, you need to respect that time and make sure that you're highlighting them as much as possible. Again, great example.
Dude, I appreciate it. So I would love your thoughts on this, because something I learned early on with that, and you had me thinking, was prepping for your guests and knowing them beyond what's on social media, but prepping and knowing, okay, like when you came in today, I think about the title of the show, Finding Your Competitive Edge. I'm like, what is Sebastian's competitive edge? And my job is to highlight how freaking awesome you are.
Yeah.
Because you're the guest.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you another question to follow up on that, because we talked about what makes a great one. What makes a crappy, bad podcast? What should we stay away from?
No editing, terrible cover art, no intro, terrible audio quality, and the host talking over the guest, and just stupid content. Regurgitated nonsense BS. I mean, we live in a world of regurgitated motivational quotes as it is. The only difference is that people don't. I mean, you might have seen my post in Apex a couple weeks ago when I said, may today be the day that you don't post a regurgitated motivational quote and claim that it's yours. Yeah.
I will say I did see it. I laughed, and it made my day. And I've shared that with a few people, like, hey guys, those motivational quotes. Although, Sebastian, the other day, motivational quote from my 14-year-old was a David Goggins quote. And
if you quote the source, it's totally fine.
That's what I said. I was like, he's like, who's going to carry the logs? And I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
When you bring those together. And I only share that because I think as you go through it, to your point, quote the source, talk about how it's inspired you. How have you used that quote to actually do something with your life?
Yeah.
Don't just be inspired and motivated. Like, what action did you take?
Right.
How do you use that to take action? So I love that. Okay, as we start to wrap up, I love this. So I think I've seen what your competitive edge is, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on What makes you unique? What is your competitive edge that you bring into the marketplace?
It's funny you asked me this because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And as podcasting becomes more and more popular, you see podcasting solutions and popping up here and there and the whole nine. I have no competition at all because I'm Sebastian Rusk. And as far as I know, there's only one. There may be another one that I found on MySpace way back in the day. But as far as I know, there's only one, our unique category of one that is Sebastian Rusk. So my competitive edge is that you will never do things the way that I do them because you're not me. You don't show up the way that I do. You're not going to communicate the way that I do. Your thought process isn't the same. The way you do things are the same. You may start a podcast company, but you're not doing it like Sebastian Rusk does it. Well, how is that? The only way that he can do it because he's the only Sebastian Rusk. And that could be a little like a little riddle-ish, if you will. But I say that with extreme confidence because I know who I am and I know how I show up in this world. And I know that because people ask me often, who's your competition? I'm like, I don't know. Well, I talked to a couple other guys. Oh, I know another company that does what you do. No, you don't. That's the first thing that I say. No, you don't. Absolutely not. And that's not an ego thing. That helps me keep my ego in check, actually, is by knowing that I know who I am. And what's meant for me is not going to miss me.
Yeah.
God doesn't mess up.
Yeah.
He doesn't at all. He's gifted me with this talent and this gift and this ability to make a drastic impact. Everything will continue to line up according to that purpose. I firmly believe it. I mean, it's biblical.
Oh, it's phenomenal. So I don't know if you heard the episode. We had Lauren Zoller. She's going to be at the conference next week we're doing. So when this airs, it'll be a little bit off on the date. But she shared something very similar. And she said, what God has planned for you and what's meant for you will not pass you by. And if it's meant for you. And I love that you share that because too many people, I think they just get lost in the fact that, okay, that passed you by, but did it really? Maybe that just wasn't for you. Maybe there's something better on the other side. And I love your journey as you unpacked it today. It's like you were just willing to step up and show up and allow certain things to say yes.
Isn't that life, though? Life is 90% showing up.
Every day.
Just literally going and showing up, And I think that, if it just takes one.
Yeah.
I don't care if I'm on an airplane, back of an Uber, giving a talk. It just takes one. That one person to say, hey, man, thanks for making the trip in. You said one thing at the end of your talk, everything changed.
Dude, well, I know today is going to be phenomenal for people. And before we wrap up, I'd love to know, where do you see things going for you over the next few years? Where's your vision for where this is going to expand into?
I want to be the largest podcast solution in the world and sell to Spotify for $650 million. That's the goal, is to be able to continue to refine my gifts, bring them to the world, continue to grow my comedy brand. That's been a journey in and of itself. Started doing comedy about 3 years ago because of fear. Because it didn't match up that I could get out and crush a keynote in front of 5,000 people, but that I can't go make 50 drunk people laugh. Come on.
Yeah.
And I had my buddy Manny Garavito, who started Miami Comedy, on my podcast, and I shared that story. And he's like, "There's no way you're scared to do comedy. Yeah, I've been following you for a couple of years. I know who you are." And I'm like, "Really?" So Miami Comedy is set up in such that it's unconventional spaces. So bars, lounges, restaurants, and he goes in and he sets up a comedy show in these places. And there's a show just about every night of the week in Miami. And he said, "Why don't you come out next Wednesday? We'll do an open mic." I'm like, "All right, cool. I can do a 5-minute open mic, no problem." And I get there and he says, "All right, you're third up." And I was like, "Oh, cool. On open mic? Cool." He goes, No, on the showcase. Don't bomb." And I'm like, "What?" So, I got up there and just knocked it out of the park, and I said, "This is it. Well, let's add comedian to the title." So, what I've tried to pave a little bit different of a route with the comedy stuff because open mics are a miserable experience. Waiting in the club to 11 o'clock at night, you may or may not go up on a Tuesday. I get up at 5 a.m. It's a miserable experience. But I'm like, how can I bring comedy to what I'm already doing? So, comedy, by the way, gets you out of your own way of fear, makes you a better communicator. Bombing builds character. And it's also another thing to add to your repertoire of, and the fear is always there. And that's what really was the differentiator. I had another comic in Miami on the show, and I asked her about the fear. And she said, the fear never disappears. You just get to make a decision on what you're going to do with it. But I tell you this, every time I get up and I crush a comedy set, I'm rifled with fear. I crush that comedy set and I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to go again. So what I've been able to do is figure out how I can take this new craft and integrate it into what I do. I can bring it back to the podcasting mic. I can bring it back to the keynote stage. Those are two things right off the bat. But what else is possible? Oh, maybe I'm booked for a keynote on Tuesday at 2:00, but there's also a cocktail reception tomorrow night that they would love for me to go in there and roast a bunch of insurance brokers.
Yeah.
So now it's turned into, again, blazing your own trail. And this has happened. This will be the fourth time that's happened this year, where I did a gig on a cruise ship in January. Of course, comedian on a cruise ship, let the jokes roll. And then I did a gig in Cancun a couple months back. And the same thing happened. That was on a tour bus. We were on our way to see Cirque du Soleil. And they got a mic in the front. And everyone's like, come on, Sebastian, tell us some jokes. Group of realtors. I was like, I've been training my whole life for this. So we had a little comedy keynote combo,
Dude, that's what we call integration. And we teach that quite a bit. And when you learn how to integrate the things that you're great at, you realize, it's very much like I tell people, it's like sports, your faith, your business, your podcast, all these things. You just bring it all together.
Bring it all together.
And you've done that. So comedy, speaking, podcast extraordinaire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the agency as well. I mean, the goal is to be able to beef this thing up to a point where we've launched so many shows that we now have a podcast network. Yeah. And once you've got a network and you've got a profitable agency, then it starts to be attractive to people to say, hey, let's take a closer look at this. And we've had some nibbles, especially this year too, people, and I just have zero interest in selling right now. So we're on the way up. It's kind of tough to what's possible if I did, So I'm looking for a big exit eventually. It'll still be podcast, speaking, comedy related. I'll be tied to the brand one way or another. But that's what I see for the next 5-6 years. I want what God wants.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what I want.
Yeah. And he'll write the course too.
Yeah.
So
he sure will.
Dude, where can people find you? Because I know today we've unpacked a lot of stuff. They're probably leaving going, okay, I have a few questions. I need more Sebastian. Where can they connect up with you?
So I hang out anywhere online, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Just shoot me a DM. If you're listening to this right now, my audiobook came out a couple months ago. So shoot me a DM and I'll send you a code to download a free copy on Audible.
Boom.
They sent me a bunch of free credits and I haven't been able to give them all away because I keep forgetting that I have them. So if you hit me up on DM, it's Podcast Suck. That's plural, Podcasts Suck on Instagram, and then Sebastian Rusk on LinkedIn and on Facebook. Just let me know you found me on Finding Your Competitive Edge here, and look forward to chatting with you. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, my links are available too in my bio on Instagram and on Facebook too. That link goes right to my calendar. I'd be happy to chat with you about what's possible with you starting a podcast.
Dude, I love it. We'll include the links, and I appreciate you showing up the way you did, making time, coming into Nashville.
My pleasure, man.
These are the things I tell people is don't overlook today. I bet people that are listening, they have one person that's going to come through their life or in their peripheral that they need to connect up with and take an action. Go set up a podcast. Go do a comedy show with them. Maybe just go listen to a comedy show if you're afraid of speaking.
Yeah.
Go to an event. Show up. What I have found, and I've seen you do this, people that show up typically tend to win more. Isn't that interesting?
Funny how that works.
Put yourself in the game, guys. We talk about this all the time. So this has been another episode of Finding Your Competitive Edge. And I love this because we're doing a podcast and obviously we're teaching you how to be better, whether you've started a podcast or you haven't started one yet at all. We want to get you in the game. Guys, what I know is people on the sideline don't win as much as people in the game. So we want to help you start your podcast, be incredible. Make sure you follow Sebastian. We'll give you the links that are there and find your competitive edge so you can then use that in the service of other people. My last ask is, if we've given you anything, a tip, motivation, something that's just kind of resonated with you, please drop us a comment. Let us know. That's why we do these. And we want to how we can further support your growth and your journey. This has been another episode of Find Your Competitive Edge. Make sure you like, subscribe, all the fun stuff. Leave us a comment. Show up for the next one. It's going to be awesome. Cheers.